An unexpected retirement resulted in Gonzaga landing transfer Jalen Warley last year. Could it happen again after Bruce Pearl's shocking departure from Auburn?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, the big news in college basketball today, Auburn coach Bruce Pearl retired on Monday. It was the first official day that teams could hold practice, and Bruce Pearl said, that is good for me. I am done after a highly decorated college basketball coaching career, but it leaves the program in the hands of his son, Stephen Pearl. We're going to talk about what that means for Auburn a little bit. We're also going to talk about how it could potentially benefit Gonzaga after they landed a transfer for a similar reason last year. We're going to get into all of that, as well as St. Mary's non-conference schedule, which was released also on Monday. It's pretty soft, and we're going to talk about that and what it might mean for them and for Gonzaga in their final season in the WCC. And then we're closing the show, as we've been doing the last couple of weeks here on the podcast, talking about different states and where those Gonzaga players came from. Today, we're talking Virginia, 3 different Zags in the Mark Few era from the state of Virginia. We'll rank those 3 players to close out the show. But obviously, we got to start with the big news, Bruce Pearl. And if you are somebody who's been following college basketball on a national stage, you may have heard some of these rumblings that Bruce Pearl was considering retiring. He's 65 years old. He's been coaching at the collegiate level for a very long time, was at Tennessee for a while, was at a Division II level for a while, has been at Auburn now for over a decade. But it still came as a shock on Monday when he actually made the announcement that he was retiring, that the program was going to be taken over by his son, who's been on staff for basically the entire time that Bruce Pearl has been on staff, about 10 years. Also, Auburn gave his son, Stephen Pearl, a 5-year contract. Stephen Pearl has never coached been a head coach, I should say, at the Division I level at all. That is a surprising move. Hiring Stephen on an interim basis, or even giving him like a 1-year deal or 2-year deal, I think kind of makes some sense. But 5-year contract is a lot of promise to give a coach who has not proven they can do it at this level. Regardless, this is part of a trend we have seen developing in college basketball over the last few years, where coaches opt to depart their programs, leave their jobs at seemingly strange times. The timing seems odd. It is intentional. It is being done this close to the season by design in an effort to prevent a mass exodus of players in the transfer portal. If Bruce Pearl had left in April, May, June, even July, if he had announced he was leaving at that time, what happens in any time is a 30-day window opens where any player on that roster can leave or can enter the transfer portal and depart. That regardless of when you leave your job. But if you leave your job in late September, or like Tony Bennett did in late October, Tony Bennett was 17 days before the start of the college basketball season. Bruce Pearl here 42 days away from the start of the season. When you leave at that time, opposing teams' rosters are almost all already set. School has started, and the NIL budgets tend to be gone. And so players are kind of forced, for lack of a better word, forced to stay at the school that they're at. It is a kind of a response by coaches to, hey, we know whenever we retire or leave, that we're going to put the program in a really bad spot. So instead of doing something where it's going to result in a huge amount of players leaving, we're going to do it at a time where that roster is kind of stuck staying in that spot. In this case, for Bruce Pearl, it ensures that Auburn will have a very competitive roster for his son, Stephen, to take over this upcoming season. But it also doesn't mean that no players will leave. Just because the assumption timing-wise is that nobody will depart doesn't mean that's the case. Gonzaga fans know that more than anybody, as Jalen Worley last year, when Tony Bennett retired 17 days before the season, Worley made the decision that I don't want to play my final year of college basketball eligibility for an interim coach that I don't have as much of a connection to. So he opted to transfer with the intention of redshirting, landed at Gonzaga, redshirted last year, and is now in line to have a very big role for this team this upcoming season. Could that happen again is the question. There's only one team in college basketball that capitalized on Tony Bennett's retirement last year, and that was Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. So if anybody's going to do it this year, it could in fact be Gonzaga again, especially as Gonzaga is in a unique position right now where they don't know if they're going to have their biggest transfer portal addition, Tyon Grant-Foster. They don't know if they're going to have him at all, if they're only going to have him for half the season, or if he's going to find out he's getting his eligibility tomorrow and he'll be practicing with the team by the middle of the week and playing in games as soon as the season starts. All of those are possibilities at this point, but every day that goes by makes it less and less likely that Tyon Grant-Foster will suit up for Gonzaga this upcoming season, meaning the Zags could potentially try to look to bring somebody in who's willing to play right away if they can make it happen. First, you need the player to be willing to enter the transfer portal in the first place. Then you need them to be willing to come to Spokane. Then you need to get them enrolled in classes and sort all of that out so that they're eligible right away. Otherwise, they may not be eligible until the semester break, which means they wouldn't be able to play for Gonzaga until January. Gonzaga could also look at players who enter the transfer portal who are envisioning redshirting and playing next season, where the Zags may look to find somebody who's willing to do that, because we know that Gonzaga's player development program is so strong, and their ability to help players develop in a redshirt year and then blossom into a version of that player that they want to be. We've seen this with Kelly Olynyk. We've seen this with transfers in the past: Kyle Wiltshire, Brandon Clark, Nigel Williams-Goss, Jonathan Williams, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, both Jalen Worley and Braden Smith planning to do the same thing. Gonzaga also may be in a position where they have leftover NIL money. They have a certain amount of money earmarked for Tyon Grant-Foster. I don't know exactly how much it is, but it is probably a lot. If Grant-Foster, again, no indication that he's for sure out, but if he is not going to suit up for this team, Gonzaga may have money and they have playing time available if somebody's willing to make that jump. Who are the candidates for Auburn? We'll go through them quickly. Again, none of these players have actually entered the transfer portal, so we don't want to get into it too far unless that actually happens. Keyshawn Hall is a 6'7" wing who spent last year at Central Florida, also had stops at UNLV and George Mason, so he is comfortable with the transfer portal. He averaged about 19 points and 7 rebounds last year in the Big 12 at Central Florida, 35% from three. He is the most similar player to Tyon Grant-Foster on this Auburn roster. Veteran guy, same size, high-level scorer, been at multiple different schools, loves having the ball in his hands. Very, very similar player. If it were to work out, he would be the most obvious candidate to replace Grant-Foster on this roster. Outside of that, you have Abdul Bashir and Elijah Freeman, both 6'8" wings, both from non-Division I schools. Bashir comes from Casper College, which is a juniors college. He averaged 27 points per game, shot 40% from three at that level last year. His brother, Abdi Bashir, is at Kansas State, so I would think they're the most likely candidate to land him, again, should he enter the transfer portal. Elijah Freeman comes from the Division II level Lincoln Memorial. He averaged 18 points per game there and already has some significant NBA draft buzz despite being a JUCO player for Auburn this season. Kevin Overton's a 6'5" guard who played last year at Texas Tech, averaged about 8 points, 4 boards, shot 33% from three, was at Drake the previous year where he averaged 11 points and also shot 35% from three. Could be a fun addition for the Zags. And then last but not least, a player that I think could make some sense as a potential redshirt stash candidate for Gonzaga is Filip Jovic. Jovic is a 6'10" big man from Serbia. He was a late addition for Bruce Pearl's roster, and he's not a 3. He's not a Tyon Grant Foster replacement, but he is a developmental big man from a country that Gonzaga has recruited big men in the past. Filip Petrusev, of course, from Serbia, as well as a few other players that Gonzaga has brought in the past. This would not be a surprise. In fact, Pavle Stosic landed at Gonzaga September 25th, 3 years ago, and is also from Serbia. Could Gonzaga land another Serbian late in the offseason? Potentially. Jovic is a very, very good player, 6'10", good rebounder, kind of a pretty traditional 4, maybe a small ball 5. Again, would be more of a Graham Ike replacement for next year, where you have Ismaila Diani, Braden Huff, Parker Jefferson, potentially Filip Jovic fills that 4th and final spot, a name to keep an eye on as well. But we're going to move on from this Auburn conversation to instead talk about Randy Bennett and the Gales in the second segment. Their non-conference schedule was released on Monday, and it's not a particularly competitive one. We're going to talk about what that means for the Gales and potentially for the Zags coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, you need to know that your favorite neighborhood spot runs on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar that's packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your name by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. So what does supporting a community look like? Spending money there doesn't just support the business, it supports the people behind it and the community around it. Those local spots are what makes the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square. See you in the neighborhood. Folks, college football is back, and I could not be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of an event than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices without any of those surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Gametime, and there, just in a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. Honestly, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way to buy tickets. If you're a Seattle area Zag fan, Washington hosts the Ohio State Buckeyes on September 27th in Seattle. You can get tickets in their zone deal, section 332 or 333. They got tickets for just $120 a piece to see this incredible Ohio State team. Plus, they got plenty of low-cost tickets available all over Husky Stadium. There's like 50, 60 different tickets that you can get for under $250. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Gametime today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're moving away from our conversation about the biggest news in the college basketball world on Monday. Bruce Pearl retiring after a prolific career as a head coach, most notably with the Tennessee Volunteers and most recently with the Auburn Tigers. Now we're going to talk about the other news that came out on Monday. St. Mary's finally released their full non-conference schedule. It is very rare, by the way, for Gonzaga to not be like the last team in all of college basketball to release their non-con. In this case, they weren't even the last team in the WCC to do so. A lot of these games for St. Mary's were known, but we now get a final full look at what their non-conference schedule is going to be. And to be honest, it's pretty weak. It's not great. I have praised St. Mary's in the last couple of years for scheduling more competitively than they had previously. And I have even pushed back on some of the narrative that has existed around the Gales of like, oh, they're afraid to leave California or they don't play anybody. Some of that is true and has been true in the past. Some of that is more so that you can't get teams to play you if people aren't willing to come to your house and play, you're not going to go to their house and play. That's been true of Gonzaga. It's been true of St. Mary's as well. And we've seen them schedule competitive, like non-power conference teams that are willing to come play them. But this year's schedule just didn't really materialize to be all that competitive. We'll go through it here one by one. Their two best games by far are their exhibition games, October 18th at Arizona and October 26th at Ole Miss. Two very, very good programs and two true road environments for the Gales to take on. Again, exhibition games, so I don't know how rowdy those environments will be, but it's at least road games. And then after that, the schedule ends up being a whole bunch of home games against kind of mediocre programs. Starts November 3rd versus St. Thomas, then November 7th against Chattanooga, November 11th against Ohio, November 14th against North Texas, November 19th against Arkansas State, and then November 22nd against UC Merced, which is, I believe, a D2 or at least a non-D1 program. That's a big stretch of 6 straight home games in Moraga against pretty mediocre teams. North Texas is good. That's about it. Nobody else on this list projects to really even put up much of a fight against the Gales. That's 6 straight pretty easy games for the Gales, and then they go to the battle for Atlantis, which through no fault of St. Mary's is just not a particularly competitive field. None of the matchups are set for the battle for Atlantis, so we don't know exactly which teams or any of the teams that the Gales will take on, but we know the teams in the field, and it's Vanderbilt, Virginia Tech, Colorado State, South Florida, VCU, Western Kentucky, and Wichita State. Only 2 power conference programs in Vandy and Virginia Tech, and then some very good mid-major schools, but only a couple teams that even project to be in the NCAA tournament next year. That'd be Vandy and VCU. I think South Florida could make it. I think Colorado State could make it, but this is ultimately not that great of a field for the Gales. After that, they do finally have their first and only road game of the non-conference slate. That'll be December 7th at Davidson. And then after that, they will play Boise State on December 14th. That game is a neutral site game, although it is in Idaho Falls, which is obviously an advantage for Leon Rice and the Broncos of Boise State. So I would categorize this as a semi-away game for Randy Bennett and the Gales. December 19th, they will host Florida Atlantic in Moraga, and then they will close out the non-conference portion of the season, also at home December 22nd against Northern Iowa. So this is a schedule for St. Mary's where they have 8 home games, 1 true road game. That's the game against Davidson. And then a neutral site game in Idaho, 3 neutral games in the battle for Atlantis. And that's it. Between the lack of travel at all for St. Mary's, between the weakened field at the battle for Atlantis, this is just not that great of a schedule for Randy Bennett and the Gales. There's really no other way to look at it. And like I said, there's been it was a very popular thing to really trash on St. Mary's unwillingness to play tough schedules about 5-6 years ago or so. Since then, we have seen this program tick up. We see them play, again, competitive games against whether Big East schools that are willing to play them, A10 schools like VCU or Dayton or programs like that. Davidson would count in that conversation. Like Randy Bennett and the Gales want to play competitive teams when they can. They're struggling to do that because nobody, we know as Gonzaga fans how hard it is to get power conference programs to be willing to play Gonzaga at the Kennel. And that arena is bigger by a considerable amount than the arena that St. Mary's plays at in Moraga. These teams do not want to go play St. Mary's in a 3,500 seat arena in Moraga, California. They just do not want to do it. I think there are things that St. Mary's could presumably do that they're not doing, that Gonzaga does, by the way. Gonzaga will play teams at the Spokane Arena. Gonzaga will play teams at the Climate Pledge Arena. And St. Mary's presumably could play teams at the Chase Center, the same place that San Francisco plays games periodically. I don't know why the Gales are not doing that. I don't know if there's a reason that they can't do that, if they're just choosing not to do that, if this is what's preferred for them. But there are things they could do to make their schedule more competitive that I assume for whatever reason they chose not to do. So for St. Mary's, I think that this is a problem for them, to be honest. I mean, I kind of get having an early part of the schedule that's not very competitive. Their first 3, even 4 games being bye games at home kind of makes sense. This is a team that's replacing 4 starters. And the only starter they have returning is Paulos Morauskas. They do have Mikey Lewis coming back as well. But This is a team that has serious NCAA tournament aspirations, as they always do. I don't think this is a program that can continue to get away with these pretty weak non-conference schedules. And I especially do not think they can continue to schedule this way in an era post-Gonzaga being in the WCC. Obviously, there are rumors consistently about St. Mary's following Gonzaga into the Pac-12. There is a possibility, of course, that does happen. But until that happens, the assumption is that St. Mary's will be the top dog in the WCC starting in 26-27. At that point, they will need to schedule competitive non-conference slates. Otherwise, they will put themselves in a position where they have to win the WCC in order to make the NCAA tournament. If you have a weak non-conference and you don't have 3 quad 1 games against Gonzaga where you can win 2 of them or 1 of them and you pick up a marquee win, if you don't have that, St. Mary's now relies heavily on San Francisco staying good, and they rely heavily on their non-conference schedule. This schedule, combined with a non-Gonzaga WCC, St. Mary's would have to be a 2 or 3 loss team at worst in order to get anything higher than like a 10 seed. Like truly, if this non-conference schedule existed and they lost, they won every single game, unless Boise State is phenomenal this year and is an obvious quad 1 game, or unless they beat Vanderbilt and Colorado State in Atlantis, this is just not a schedule that's going to end up all that impressive. And then if this is a non-Gonzaga WCC, even if you sweep in the WCC, this could be a 3-loss St. Mary's team without Gonzaga in the mix. That's like a 10 seed. Like, honestly, I think that's a possibility here. So next year, if St. Mary's is still in the WCC, their schedule will have to be more competitive than this, or they're going to run the risk of helping turn the WCC into what's happened to the A10, where it becomes the A10 was a 2 or 3 bid league consistently every year for decades. And now 2 of the last 3 years has been a 1 bid league. That could happen to the WCC. And obviously Gonzaga will be at fault, for lack of a better word. But if St. Mary's doesn't tick up their non-conference scheduling, they'll be part of the problem as well. Well, folks, we're going to close out the show. 3 Zags have come to Spokane from the state of Virginia, including 2 fan favorites from very different eras. We're going to break that down to close out the show coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anybody else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Because with Mazda, everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show, continuing our series where we are talking about the best Mark Few era Zags from various states across this country. We've talked about now 8 different states where we have ranked every Gonzaga player of the past 25 years who hails from that state, according to Basketball Reference's birthplace section of their site. So we're on number 9 now. We've done Oregon, Colorado, Minnesota, Idaho, Illinois, California, Texas, and most recently Nevada. And now today we are talking about the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth. Yes, it was partly a kind of a nod to the fact that this show started with us talking about Jalen Worley, who transferred from Virginia, and partly because we're running out of states that have had 3 or more players. Feels like there's no point in doing a ranking with 2 or less players. So if 3 or more players in the last 25 years came from that state, we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we're going to kind of have to lump everybody else together in a separate show. But Virginia, there are 3 players. 2 who were in this program very recently, 1 who was in this program at the very early part of this window of time that we're talking about here. So we're just going to go through it here, 1, 2, 3 in order by our rankings. This was a pretty easy one to pick the order. We're starting with Rasir Bolton. Rasir Bolton from Petersburg, Virginia, spent 2 years at Gonzaga, the 21-22 season, and then again in the 22-23 season. It was his third stop at the college level. He began his career at Penn State and then played 2 years at Iowa State before coming over to Gonzaga to finish his career. All told, Bolton appeared in 69 games in a Gonzaga uniform, averaged about 27 minutes, 11 points, 2.5 assists, 2 boards, shot at 42.5% from three. I was shocked that Rasir was not even an all WCC second teamer in either of his 2 years in Spokane. He should have WCC awards somewhere on his basketball reference page. I was surprised that was not the case. His 42.5% is one of the best 3-point percentages in program history. He was a better 3-point shooter by percentage in a Gonzaga uniform than Kevin Pangos, than Richie Fromm, than Adam Morrison, than Blake Stepp, than Corey Kispert. The list goes on and on and on. A prolific sharpshooter for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. He had some tremendous individual performances in his career as well. 24 points in Gonzaga's win over Kentucky at the Spokane Arena back in 2022. 17 points against TCU in the NCAA Tournament round of 32, a game Gonzaga only won by 3 to keep their Sweet 16 streak alive. He also had that game-winning shot against San Francisco that went semi-viral because of the way a fan for San Francisco reacted, seemingly screaming in Rasir Bolton's face, although Rasir, to his credits, didn't even appear to notice that was happening. An incredible player, and beyond that, Rasir was an incredible person, did a ton of work in the Spokane community, helped out with the homeless population, was given awards by the mayor of Spokane for his dedication to the city and the homeless population. An all-time favorite, a fan favorite for a reason. Rasir was one of the best to ever do it in a Gonzaga uniform, certainly the best from the state of Virginia to ever do it, and we wish him continued luck and success in his professional career overseas. Number 2 on this list is the Zag from way back in the early parts of Mark Few's tenure. That is Winston Brooks. Like Rasir Bolton, Rasir is from Petersburg, Virginia. Winston Brooks is from Richmond, Virginia. He actually moved from Virginia to the Pacific Northwest, or the Inland Northwest, to begin his college basketball career at North Idaho College. Spent 2 years there before transferring to Gonzaga, and was at Gonzaga for the 01-02 and 02-03 seasons. Appeared in 47 games in a Gonzaga uniform, averaged just under 3 points, as well as just under 3 assists and 2.3 rebounds per game. His first year, he started all 14 games he appeared in, but then broke his wrist and missed the rest of the season. He came back for his senior year, started 30 of 33 games in 02-03, led the conference with those 33 games played. Winston Brooks also was part of one of the most famous Gonzaga basketball games of all time, the 2003 double overtime loss to a powerhouse Arizona program, again in the 03 NCAA Tournament. Brooks played 41 minutes in that game, had 5 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. He is now a police officer for the Spokane Police Department, has been doing that for a while. Winston Brooks was a great glue guy role player type. 41 minutes and 5 points, but with 6 rebounds and 4 assists, like that feels Mike Hart-esque. In the sense of like playing a big role, playing a lot of minutes, but not scoring a whole bunch of points, but impacting the game in other ways. That's who Winston Brooks was. He was a key role player, a key piece to some of those really great early Gonzaga teams that helped put this program on the map nationally in a way that they had never been previously, and that they have extended far beyond since then over the last couple of decades. Big shout out to Winston Brooks, another fan favorite who finds his way on this list. Third on the list, the final piece of the Virginia area Zags, is Efton Reed. Efton Reed from Richmond, Virginia, same place as Winston Brooks. Reed spent 1 year at Gonzaga, did overlap with Rasir Bolton in Bolton's final year with the program. That was the 2022-23 season. Previously, Efton Reed had been at LSU. He then spent the last 2 years of his college basketball career at Wake Forest. While in a Gonzaga uniform, Reed appeared in 25 games, averaged about 5 minutes, 2 points, 1 rebound, shot 62% from the field. Reed scored 16 of the 53 total points that he scored in a Gonzaga uniform. 16 of them came in a game against an NAIA school in Eastern Oregon. Reed just really struggled to carve out a role in a Gonzaga uniform. He showed up on campus. He had a role in the first few games of the season, played okay, but then lost his playing time in the Phil Knight Invitational when Gonzaga played Purdue, and Ben Gregg went nuts in that game. At the time, Ben Gregg was considered the fourth big, and it wasn't really even close. But then Ben surpassed Efton Reed on the depth chart, and Reed really struggled to get any playing time for the rest of the season. He ended up transferring after the year, landed at Wake Forest alongside former Gonzaga guard Hunter Salas, and Reed found his footing at Wake Forest. He spent 2 years with the Demon Deacons, averaged 9.7 boards and just over 1 block per game. I was happy to see Efton figure it out and find a spot that really allowed him to play the role that he wanted to play, especially in a conference like the ACC, where he got to compete against Duke and North Carolina and Louisville and other great programs like that. But it sure did not work for Efton Reed in a Gonzaga uniform. Just the timing wasn't there. The role that he needed, he just wasn't able to grab a hold of it, and it ended up resulting in him spending most of that season on the bench. It's going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. Again, we'll continue this series with a few more states, and then we'll look at some other countries as well here on Locked On Zags. We'll also keep you up to date on any more recruiting news as that stuff comes together for this program. As we hit late September, we're only less than 2 weeks away from craziness in the kennel, and of course the start of our season preview series, talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster, giving you predictions for how they're going to do this year. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.